Marketers are told to stay close to customers, understand trends, and of course, to spend less. Catalytic marketing focuses on a small number of deliberate experiences to instill lasting change in our target audiences. Is this finally the solution that we've been awaiting? And if so, how do we make this shift? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes flat out lies. Join us as we leave the echo chamber and talk about this relatively new trend.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we try to unpack the good and bad in today's marketing wisdom. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the calm caretaker of cataclysmic catalyzing, Colin Jeffries. Colin, let's get into catalytic marketing. And does this have anything to do with the naming of this being something similar to the car part of catalytic converters?
I sure hope not, because if we're talking car parts, Paul, I am way out of my league. But I do think it's an appropriate alliteration, the calm caretaker of cataclysmic catalyzing. I think you did a really good job there, because we do, as marketers, have to remain calm in the face of these ever-changing trends. It feels like there's another marketing mantra or marketing philosophy or marketing advice every day almost. So staying calm, I think, is key, and well played on the alliteration.
Absolutely. So talk about what we're rethinking today.
Absolutely, Paul. Gladly. Marketers often fall victim to the pressure of doing more with less and the pressures of a more is more attitude from stakeholders like product, sales, human resources, etc. Catalytic marketing is this relatively new concept that's built on doing less with less. It makes sense on paper. So today I'm excited to dive in and explore, is it realistic in practice?
It's an exciting opportunity to go and talk about this. It reminds me of several years ago when I was working at Clear Channel before it was iHeartRadio, and we were trying to explain to our advertisers less is more, and this whole concept of less is more. How does that even make sense? It was very difficult to explain to marketers on, you're going to spend more money with us or the same amount of money for less advertising. So before we dive in, I just wanted to reminisce on my Clear Channel days and think about how I tried to explain that to our advertisers on a 30-second commercial is now going to be a 15-second commercial, but it's going to cost the same amount of money. So I'm interested in this conversation.
Absolutely. I guess, Paul, let's dive in there. When you're explaining less is more, or in some cases more is less, we think about diminishing returns, for example. Just because we're writing bigger checks or we're hiring more people or we're driving more engagement does not necessarily mean that is translating into additional revenue or, more importantly, additional profit. So maybe walk us through some of those conversations as a good jumping off point.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first brought that to market, and it was an initiative around the entire country with trying to figure out less advertising. And, back then it was more or less trying to convince the advertiser where we were going to run less commercials in an actual stop break, and being able to let them know that they were going to have a bigger share of voice and have the opportunity to really have much more of an impact on their radio commercials than if they were running 30-second spots. So us as marketers, us as the account executives back then, had to really work with our creative services department on really writing better ads, because you only had a 15-second time frame or a 30-second instead of a 60-second, or we even went all the way down to 5-second and 2-second ads. And you just had to be really creative when coming up with those concepts.
Well, for those in the Cincinnati market, they'll recognize the Weiler.com 2-second spots. I thought those played a ton, and it's indelibly burnt into my brain here. But Paul, I love that you've brought up impact. I think that's crucial, and that's really what catalytic marketing is all about, because what we're trying to do is say no to non-core, non-important activity and say yes, and yes only, to core activities that really make a difference and, to your point, have an impact. So for anybody that's unfamiliar with catalytic marketing, it's built on 3 C's. The first C is clarity of objectives and strategically important activities. That means that marketers as a team or leaders of the business have to sit down and we have to agree these are the goals. We want to, for example, drive more profitability. We want to build our target audience. We want to XYZ fill in the blank. That's what we want to do. And we're going to say yes to activities that do that well and strongly. And we're going to say no to activities that don't do that. So catalytic marketing really empowers us, or it should empower us, to avoid this mentality of do everything all the time, production for production's sake, and instead really revel in clarity, knowing we can say no to activity that does not drive our core objectives or is not strategically important.
All right. So, Colin, the second C, connections with your team, connections with the audience, prioritizing of capabilities to enable, the coordinated adaptive use of resources. So no more staying constantly close to your audience or being active on every channel. So those connections, it's interesting when talking about catalytic marketing and the connections, not only with the advertiser, but with the team putting together the actual ads themselves as well. So taking both sides of that is an interesting point when looking at this.
Absolutely. One of the chief complaints that I hear from marketing teams, and you may as well, Paul, is the meetings for meetings' sake and how that can be a huge drain on productivity and on time. I look at time as one of the major resources that marketing teams have. I'll just give a quick example here. On one side, we know that it's really important to be close to customers. So let's take a marketer who's going to get fired from their job for spending all of their time, 45, 50, 60 hours a week with customers. On the flip side, because it's important to spend time with customers, we might have a marketer who's about to get fired from their job for spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week, never talking to customers, only working in their little silo. There's a balance there, but there are also areas where we hit diminishing returns. Should you be spending 5% of your time with customers? Is that too little? Is 10% too much? Is 20% too much? Is 25% too much? I talk to some folks on my team. We have centers throughout the US, and my team will often go out as individual contributors or as a collective. We'll go out and we'll work with patients and we'll try to understand, our B2B side, our referral partners and things of that nature. And the first 3 or 4 visits are infinitely more beneficial than the next 5 to 10 visits. And the reason is during those initial visits, that's when you learn, oh, I had this assumption, it was wrong, or this was never on my radar, or that's new news to me and it's very interesting information. That's when you notice trends and customer preferences and things of that nature. Well, when you've done 50 visits over 18 months, let's say, there's a level of diminishing returns where doing another 50 visits over the next 18 months will not yield the same level of results and the same potency that the initial ones did because we're hitting those diminishing returns. So I think that second C is really important, Paul, where we have to recognize, again, going back to the first C of clarity, we can't just do production and activity for the sake of production and activity. We really have to understand we're staying close to our customers in these ways that are very specific, and we're interacting with them on these channels, again, that are very specific and intentional. Sorry about that, Paul. I feel like I hijacked the conversation on your bullet point.
No, it's good. It reminds me of a research study that we just did with a healthcare company. And I agree with you. The first few interviews that we had with actual patients, there was a lot of assumptions, like you mentioned, and there was a lot of things that the unknown. And as more and more conversations were happening, we were able to pivot and look at really diving a little bit deeper and figuring out, okay, these are questions that we already know, so we can get a little bit more ingrained into what we were actually there to, in fact, find. So I agree with you on that.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think to your point, finding that area of diminishing returns is key. Well, the third C of catalytic marketing is courage and constraints in paring down non-core investments or projects, which means no more saying yes to everything or using the marketing budget to support low results activities. This is going to be pretty unpopular with a lot of small businesses, but I think it's important that we define this. A lot of marketing budgets are flexing and they're covering local sports team sponsorships, or they're buying team t-shirts for a local 5K. If we're embracing catalytic marketing and its core tenets of being courageous in constraining and paring down non-core activities, that means we're actually saying, hey, the marketing budget should be used to accomplish this core objective. Let's say it's grow margin, or it's improve profitability, or it's increase share of wallet, something of that nature, right? It's very key and it's very clear. And that's our North Star that we're driving toward. And so when we think about sponsoring a little league team, or maybe a minor league team, or we think about buying t-shirts for a 5K, that's reducing our budget and making us less capable of accomplishing our goal. So we have to be courageous and have some of these difficult conversations and say, I'm sorry, we can't do that, because we're trying to accomplish our core activities as a marketing function.
Yeah, we have a lot of clients that get into this all the time, where the CEO wants to sponsor something because they're passionate about it, a church or a charity, and then all of a sudden it trickles down the line. And you'll get requests from team members of asking to sponsor their kids' little league team, and so where does it stop? You've got the main, the CMO of an organization, or the VP of marketing an organization, that's trying to drive these North Star, the KPIs that you mentioned, and it gets derailed. So that CMO is held accountable, but that budget continues to get reduced, and it's just so sporadic on how it's being parsed out. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, but it's also a very much of a challenge that we see with organizations.
Absolutely. I think you make a great point, Paul. And this is a big reason why catalytic marketing is gaining some traction and becoming more popular, because it, in theory, should empower the chief marketing officer, the marketing director, the head of marketing, whatever their title is, to push back and say, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that sponsorship for these reasons. They inhibit us from accomplishing our goal. There are diminishing returns. There are fill in the blank. And those can be awkward and difficult conversations, especially if we as an organization desire that goodwill of the communities that we serve. Unfortunately, though, as marketers, when we're being told to do more and spend less, we just can't say yes to everything. Instead, we have to make cuts, and sometimes those can be uncomfortable. But I think you make a great point there. So for our audience, real quick recap, catalytic marketing's 3 C's again are clarity of objectives, connections with your team and audience, and courage in constraints, and paring down non-core investments or projects. So really making sure that we're shifting our mentality to say no to non-core items, and instead we're focused on creating experiences for our customers that are driving change and they're driving profit for the organization. That means we have to be strategic and courageous in saying, we're not going to have a pop-up shop this day at that location, or we're not going to sponsor that trade show, or we're not going to have a booth there, because what we're trying to do is have meaningful and unique experiences that are driving change, not just customer touch points.
So how we're in April now, Colin, and looking at it, first quarter's behind us, looking at budgets for the rest of the year, how can us marketing professionals be able to take a stance, if they're wanting to, on the catalytic marketing for the rest of the year?
Great question, Paul. I think a lot of this has to be the CMO or the head of marketing selling catalytic marketing up the chain a little bit. That way the executive team or the C-suite are all bought in and they all recognize, hey, marketing is a finite resource. We have to all agree that we're not going to spend the budget ad infinitum. We're going to agree this is the core metric of success: more profit, greater share of wallet, et cetera. And that's what we're going to anchor to. And once that happens, then the head of marketing should be, if it's a psychologically safe, healthy organization, they should be empowered to go back to the C-suite and say, hey, I'm being asked for this project on this timeline. It does not help us accomplish our core goal that we all agreed upon. What do you guys think? Should we still do it? And then sometimes there can be a lot of dialogue back and forth about, well, product really needs this, or HR really needs that, or here's this other dumpster fire we're trying to put out over on the operations side, and we need marketing support for it, even though it's not giving us greater revenue, greater profit, greater share of wallet, or helping us accomplish that goal. I don't know if that was helpful or not, Paul. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. And the other thing to think about is, could it come out of another budget? Obviously, being channeled through marketing a lot of times, just because that's the catch-all for most things, where could it be a charitable donation bucket or a community involvement bucket, to where that could be something that isn't always challenged up to the CMO and be able to be used at will, if you will, and be able to really be thought about as a community experience versus the actual marketing budget and achieving those goals that the marketing director or CMO is trying to do in the course of a year.
That's a great point. And I'll take that one step further and say that there's a lot of work that falls on marketing that could actually be delegated to outside functions, human resources, product, et cetera. Not that we should give more work to the sales team or the operations team or what have you, but there are many things that fall to marketing. I think about, we need standardized signage that says what our Wi-Fi password is in all of our locations, or we need an upgrade to our NPS system or something of that nature. And it falls on marketing to actually execute against that versus bringing in an outside team like operations or sales or whatever the situation is. When marketing's able to rely on these 3 C's and say, we can no longer say yes to everything and spend less to do it, then we're actually able to come to the table and make suggestions about creative solutions that pull people in beyond just the 4 walls of the marketing team, which goes back to a frequent witticism that I have, which is marketing ain't just a department. We can reach outside of people that have the marketing badge, so to speak, or marketing titles, and actually leverage them to continue to drive customer engagement.
So, Colin, this is a great conversation for today. Catalytic marketing, it's something that I actually had to do a lot of research before jumping into this episode and really digest it a little bit more. But it certainly makes sense, and it's an opportunity for us marketing professionals to take a different approach as we are being asked to do more with less. So it's really an opportunity for us marketers to take a different approach and really figure out the rest of 2024, a possibility that doesn't make sense this year, to really think about budgets for next year and take a different on it. So, episode, Colin, and hopefully the rest of your day.
Recap, Paul. Post-marketing initiative philosophies and catalytic marketing really focuses on getting the buy-in of the executive and the rest to interact with marketing. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Until next week, keep rethinking those common assumptions and whether or not catalytic marketing is right for you and your organization. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.